Hello and welcome to the PFF Free Agency Live Show. I'm Doug Kyed, joined by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. It's been a pretty wild day already. It's one of those days that never seems to end from the time that the open tampering period starts at noon, goes on till probably midnight or later. Then we're right back at this tomorrow. But Ari, how are you holding up today?
Well, the reality is this thing has been starting since like last week, so it's just a continuation and it just never stops. The NFL is the greatest reality show ever, and it's not going to stop this week. We're just going to keep on firing away.
Yeah, Brad, how are you holding up today?
Yeah, like you said, technically it's not even free agency yet. We're still in the legal tampering period, whatever that's supposed to mean. But yeah, I think there's still obviously some big moves. I mean, you look at our top free agent board, Davante Adams, number 1, still doesn't have a multi-year deal. Teron Armstead, number 2, still doesn't have a multi-year deal. So there are plenty of big moves on the way.
Yeah, this will be continuing into tomorrow and then Wednesday when free agency actually officially begins. It is kind of funny, as Ari said, free agency hasn't actually even begun yet. Yet we have like every single term to some of these contracts. They're being signed as unrestricted free agents. It's all a bit of a farce. This really started at the combine, probably even earlier than that. Teams meeting with agents about these players, but now we're all learning about who is going where, which is definitely fun. Let's talk about a player who is actually staying where he played last season, but there was still some big news surrounding him on Sunday. Quarterback Tom Brady, back from retirement. He says he's going back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's what we'll believe at this point. But my biggest reaction to this, and I feel like I was saying it to everyone at the Super Bowl and the Combine and all these events over the last few weeks and months, I was shocked that Tom Brady retired in the first place. So it's almost less surprising to me that he's actually now back and playing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2022 again. I feel like at some point we'll get the full story on why Tom Brady retired, why it was reported that Tom Brady was going to retire, why he announced it in 9 slides on Instagram. But Ari, I'll start off with you. What was your reaction to Tom Brady returning to the Bucs, and were you surprised by the news?
It's interesting because I've been doing, my shows and I've been asking most of my guests, hey, do you think he's going to come back? And I really just don't really know what the answer should be. I didn't know if he was trying to troll us. And then on Sunday morning, we get the video of Cristiano Ronaldo and him talking, and it's on his Instagram story. He knows what he's doing. I don't know if he's trolling or playing with us, but, we actually asked me and Brad at the comment, we asked Jason Light about this topic, and this is what he had to say. Let's play it over here. We're talking off camera. You've probably gotten a million Tom Brady questions already, but I feel like we have to start there. You know what I mean? Tom saying never say never on his podcast, that raise an eyebrow for you?
We'll always leave a light on for a guy like Tom Brady. So I have no information to say that he is going to unretire. We've got to make plans moving forward. But until those plans come into fruition, we'll see.
So they effectively left the light on for Tom Brady. Yeah.
Yeah, the light was left on, and he came back on Sunday. And really, we should have seen this coming, right? They franchise tagged Chris Godwin, who was coming off a torn ACL, instead of Carlton Davis. It's why are they doing that? And maybe they actually knew that this could be a possibility. Tom Brady is back, not just the quarterback, but looks like the assistant GM as well. Ryan Jensen is back. Carlton Davis is back as well. They're bringing the band back together. Obviously, Alex Capa left to Cincinnati. Ali Marpet retired. They're going to have to do some shuffling around. But overall, Jason Light, Bruce Arians, the entire city of Tampa Bay, they're very happy. The best quarterback of all time is back. The NFC is once again a little bit. We have another team that's in with the Rams and the Packers that are up there. We're looking at the AFC and how stacked that is, and the NFC wasn't that stacked. Getting Tom back in there definitely makes it a little bit more interesting than the NFC.
Yeah, and I mean, as I was saying, yes, they left the light on for Tom Brady, but they didn't really even have to, since he returned before free agency even started. So it's not as if they had to, curb their spending or alter anything over the last couple of weeks. He came back right in time for this open tampering period. But Brad, I'll throw this to you. They've already re-signed, as Ari said, Carlton Davis, a number of other free agents. At this point, with Tom Brady back in the mix, first of all, do they need to get another deal in place for Tom Brady? And second of all, what kind of money do they have now to extend Chris Godwin and get some other deals done in here?
Yeah, so the funny thing is they never actually processed his retirement. So when he came back, they didn't have to do anything contractually. They might restructure his deal. I don't think there's going to be any new cash on that deal. Obviously, floated with retirement at this point, so I doubt he's now looking for some raise. I think it's going to be more about, like you said, being an assistant GM and just recruiting. Obviously, I'm sure Rob Gronkowski got the bat signal, and I'm sure there are some other guys in the works.
Let's move on. Jacksonville Jaguars went on a major spending spree today. The biggest deal of those was signing Christian Kirk for a deal that pays him up to $21 million per year. It's a $18 million base deal. But Ari, what can you tell us about some of these other signings that the Jaguars made it just on the first day of this open tampering period?
Yeah, they hired Doug Peterson. He comes in, and it looks like they're looking to remake that offense. Christian Kirk, which I think kind of broke the internet when that happened, based off the numbers that we were getting. A massive deal for him, and we'll talk about the wide receivers later, but his deal could definitely hold up some of the other guys based off what they're waiting to get. But this is a team that went out. They're also getting Brandon Scherf, who's the guard from Washington, who played under 2 consecutive franchise tags, finally was let go free, and now he's heading over to Jacksonville. We all know that Trent Baalke is the guy from the Bill Parcells tree. He's all about the trenches. Same thing with Doug Peterson, as we saw in Philadelphia, all about the trenches. They're looking to build that up over there. Brandon Scherf is a massive guy to bring in for them. Then as well, they bring in a guy like Evan Ingram, who many people believe could be more of a slot receiver in the NFL. He had a couple of bumps with the Giants, a couple of drops, still a very young player, a player that many believe has a lot of potential. So he heads down there on a 1-year deal worth $9 million fully guaranteed. They look to, help him out with his potential. And then they also added 2 more guys on the defensive side with, Fatusaki from the Jets, who's a run-stuffing guy, someone who, if you look at the stats, you're like, who is this guy? But when you watch all the numbers and look at the PFF grading, someone who is a tremendous run stopper will help out that defense. And then lastly, of course, getting the linebacker from Atlanta, whose name is just slipping, Foy. Guys, help me out over here. Luakun, there we go. They get him as well. Led the league in tackles last year with 192 tackles. Last 2 years as well, has 5 interceptions, 5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles. Guy is all over the field. His numbers actually, when it comes to those stats, actually align with Darius Leonard. So a massive deal for him, as the inside linebacker group was not that deep. He's able to get a big payday because of that.
I think we all kind of knew that the Jaguars would be spending a lot in free agency before all of this even started. They were tied to Allen Robinson, Teron Armstead. They wind up Brandon Scherf. They franchise tagged Cam Robinson, get Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram in. I'm personally a little bit curious to see how this offense all fits together, because Christian Kirk, kind of a slot option. Evan Ingram, kind of a slot option in that offense. They've also got Jamal Agnew, kind of a slot option. Laviska Shenault, I don't know how he fits into this mix, but it might be Marvin Jones on the outside somehow is the only guy, and then a bunch of slot receivers around him. But Brad, what do you think about the fit of a lot of these guys in the offense and the defense?
Yeah, I mean, they obviously, like you said, we knew they were going to spend. I'm not sure we knew they were going to spend this much, and they needed to get receivers for Trevor Lawrence. For Jamal Agnew, historically kind of special teams returner / corner / wide receiver, to be their number 1 option for a stretch of the season last year is just not what you want for the number 1 overall pick. It also sounds like they're not done. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN says they're very much so in the mix on Darius Williams, the corner from the Los Angeles Rams. So that spending spree is ongoing.
Let's get on to a player who's been franchise tagged, but seems like he won't be happy to play on the franchise tag, which is understandable. Davante Adams, we mentioned earlier, Green Bay Packers star wide receiver. You see that Christian Kirk signs for $18 million a year, up to $21 million. $21 million is actually less than the franchise tag is paying Davante Adams this season. So you can certainly understand why he would not want to do that. During the season, actually very early in the season, I'd heard that Davante Adams wanted to get a deal that was $30 million per year. That seemed pretty crazy at the time. Maybe not that crazy at this point now that you're seeing Mike Williams get $20 million a year, Christian Kirk get $18 million, Amari Cooper still at $20 million. So he might not actually hit that $30 million threshold, but he definitely could get close. Obviously, he's going to have to sign a deal that's going to allow the Packers to have some other maneuverability and flexibility in there. But Ari, are you surprised, I guess, that Davante Adams wouldn't be happy playing on the franchise tag?
No, I mean, I really don't think we should be surprised. Arguably the best wide receiver in all of football. $20 million on a one-year tag is not something he'll want to do, and it's pretty obvious why. You mentioned all the numbers of all these other receivers and what they're getting. I think the bigger issue here, and it's a bit of the nitty-gritty when it comes to numbers, is really where is the wide receiver market right now, where Julio Jones is at 22, DeAndre Hopkins is at 27, but a lot of people don't really believe you could really say it's 27, because if we go back to when Hopkins did that deal, he had 3 years left on his contract, and then they tacked on 2 more for $27 million. And if you combine the 5, it really comes out to $19 million a year. So it's a big topic in the agent world, a big topic in the executive world. One number really is DeAndre Hopkins. So you mentioned that Davante Adams wanted to get $30 million a year. He's looking at Hopkins at $27 million. Meanwhile, other people believe the highest paid wide receiver really is $22 million. That really is where the holdup most likely is. And Adams obviously rightfully wants to be paid as the highest receiver in football. The question really becomes, where is that number? Is it over 27 or is it at 22? And that's probably where the debate is right now between the two sides.
Brad, you're our salary cap guru here at PFF.com. If you had to project something for Davante Adams, trying to figure out how he can get more than DeAndre Hopkins, but maybe not get up to that $27 million mark. What do you see for Davante Adams? How do they settle this?
I don't think they're going to be able to without topping that number. When that report came out, I kind of had, I didn't totally believe it, and I wanted to check with some folks and see if that was a real request, and it sounds like it is. And so I don't think he's going to get $30 million per year, but I think he very well could get $27.5 million per year. And as we're talking about Christian Kirk and we're talking about Mike Williams, we also have to recognize there could be early extensions coming for guys like Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, all these young early extension candidates as well. And I was going to say, you add in Tyreek Hill. I think Stephon Diggs in Buffalo could maybe be negotiating an extension as well. So if those guys come in at 23, 24, 25, whatever, then Adams has a very easy case for why he should top that number. But, the Packers are not letting that slow them down. They brought back 2 defensive players and Preston Smith on a 5-year, $52.5 million deal, 4-year, $52.5 million deal, and Devondre Campbell, their linebacker, on 5-year, $50 million. So they are still making moves, still spending money on their guys as they wait for Adams and Rodgers to officially sign that contract, which he has not done.
And cornerback Jair Alexander might also become the highest paid cornerback at some point, according to some reports as well, on an extension. So Packers are just doling out that money right now. Let's talk about another guy who's earned a lot of money throughout the course of his career. Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins gets a 1-year contract extension. This was notable to me just because there are a lot of teams out there still looking for quarterbacks, one of which was the Seattle Seahawks. I know that Pete Carroll loves Kirk Cousins. It seemed like there was at least some interest from Seattle in potentially acquiring Kirk Cousins via trade, especially since the Vikings have a new head coach, new general manager. But Kirk Cousins gets another year tacked onto that contract that at least guarantees for me that Cousins will be in Minnesota for 2022. We might be having these same conversations next year now, since it's only a 1-year contract extension. But, with so much uncertainty at quarterback, I know that, some people aren't overly high on Kirk Cousins, but at least it does provide a little bit of stability there for Minnesota in their offense. Were you expecting Kirk Cousins to stick around Minnesota?
I mean, well, they had to make a decision here before, it's time to, spend over here in free agency at a massive $45 million cap hit, and they hired Kevin O'Connell to be the head coach. They have a relationship 1 year in Washington, which O'Connell said was a great year for him. They worked, very nicely together, got along. So they bring him in. He's the head coach. He wants to work with Kirk Cousins. And obviously, the way Kirk Cousins has structured this contract, and of course, Brad could probably delve into it deeper, but him going to Minnesota on a fully guaranteed deal, only 3 years, he cannot be franchise tagged anymore. He's basically tied up their hands. At any point, it gets to 1 year left, and they really have no choice besides for extend him or make him a lame duck quarterback on a high cap number. So extend them for another year, and they might be back in this position again next year if he has a decent year. Everyone talks about him being a middle tier quarterback. If that's what he is, it's hard to find the replacement. They're going to keep on doing this every single year, and Kirk Cousins is a legend when it comes to making money as a quarterback.
Yeah, Brad, get into some of those financials for us a little bit.
Yeah, so I think the funny thing here is, I know Vikings fans maybe don't want to hear this, but this is actually the sharp move, kind of the only thing you can do if you are Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the new general manager, because as Ari mentioned, Kirk Cousins is effectively not franchise taggable. He's already been tagged twice. a third tag would be an astronomical number. And so letting him enter the final year of a contract, you basically are best case scenario, getting a third round compensatory pick. And if he plays like he did this season, next season, there will still be teams calling. We always see, a handful of teams every year that are desperate for a quarterback. And so, if a guy like Carson Wentz can go for a third and future second, I don't see why Kirk Cousins, even next season, could get a first plus. And so, basically, with the Vikings, basically what they did is just franchise tag him, right? I mean, it was a 1 year, $35 million extension. Like Ari said, he is one of the best contract negotiators of all time. But it was also a sharp move for Minnesota because it retains control, and maybe they can get that huge trade offer next offseason.
The Dallas Cowboys are playing a game of wide receiver musical chairs right now. Obviously, they still have CeeDee Lamb firmly in place in their offense, but they traded Amari Cooper to the Cleveland Browns for fifth-round pick, swap of sixths. Not a whole lot there, basically getting him off their books. He was signed for 3 years, $60 million at this point, so that takes him off their books. They re-signed Michael Gallup to a really team-friendly contract, 5 years, $62.5 million, compared to some of those other wide receiver contracts that we're already talking about, considerably cheaper than a guy like Christian Kirk. If Christian Kirk seems unlikely, we'll find out. Obviously, we'll see what happens with that. If he gets that $21 million a year, Michael Gallup is making almost half of that amount on a per year basis now with the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys did lose Cedric Wilson in free agency to Miami Dolphins, so they will probably still be looking for a third wide receiver. Smart way to do that right now, since every single draft is loaded with wide receivers, is probably through the draft to get another young guy in their offense. But Ari, I'll start off with you again. Is this the way that you envisioned the Dallas Cowboys offense, this offseason for the Cowboys, losing Cooper, losing Wilson, and keeping Gallup?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels surprising at first. If you want to take a big picture outlook at it, when the Cowboys signed Amari Cooper, it was a 5-year, $100 million deal, but effectively it was really a 2-year deal. They never restructured that contract. They left it alone, which basically allowed them to move on from it after 2 years, and that's what they did. They believe they have obviously CeeDee Lamb there. They believe in Michael Gallup. And again, you mentioned it, but the deal that Gallup got is a tremendous value for them. $12.4 million on a 5-year deal is something, especially with the cap expected to go up in a year because of the TV deals. That is a super, super team-friendly deal. When you're looking at all these other receivers, what they're getting. So getting him in there for 5 years, not a shorter-term deal, is obviously tremendous value. But losing Cedric Wilson, I'm not sure if that was really part of the plan for them when they were doing this. I think the hope was to bring him in along with Gallup, along with Lamb, and also keeping Dalton Schultz. But he bolts over to Miami, and now he's going to be involved with Mike McDaniel's offense. But again, like you mentioned, this draft is pretty deep when it comes to wide receiver. We were just now in Indy. We saw all those guys flying at the 40. It's a very deep wide receiver class. It's going to continue to be deep every single year. It's kind of becoming like the running backs once were, where you could find somebody in the 5th, 6th, 7th round who could end up being a play for you right away in year number 1. So they're most likely will be looking at the draft to find another receiver. There are still a bunch of guys available as well in free agency, but they believe the $20 million that Cooper was owed every single year was just simply not worth it. We'll move on, find somewhere cheaper, and we'll see what they do in the coming days.
Cedric Wilson signed a 3-year, $22.8 million contract with the Dolphins. So that's another pretty friendly team-friendly contract considering some of these other deals that are out there. But Brett, on Amari Cooper, it was reported during the Combine that the Cowboys would likely have to release Cooper, but then they actually wound up getting something for him. Like I said, 5th-round pick, swap of 6. Not a whole lot, but how much do you think this wide receiver market actually influenced the fact that they could pull off a trade rather than just having to straight up cut him?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, maybe they saw a guy like Mike Williams get that same 3-year, $60 million deal. And look, he's a good player. He also had top 50 receptions for the first time in his career last year. And, Amari has been putting up 1,000-yard seasons pretty much since the day he joined the league. And I think the ironic thing, honestly, is that they get Michael Gallup done before the tampering period, which they did not accomplish with Amari Cooper, and may have led to the 5-year, $100 million deal. And maybe they could have gotten it a little bit lower. And it's funny because then they get Gallup done, and it's one of the steals, even taking into account he tore his ACL. He also missed time this year with a calf injury before the ACL, but all that, Ari nailed it. A 5-year deal when Kirk's at 4 and Mike Williams at 3, and we see this push towards shorter contracts. It's a good value, and it's a long-term deal. It's aging masterfully in Dallas. even though they lost Cedric Wilson and Amari Cooper.
We'll see if this ages masterfully or wonderfully for the Steelers, but they signed Mitchell Trubisky to be their starting quarterback in 2022. He will compete with Mason Rudolph. I think that, we don't have the financials yet on Trubisky, but probably given what they're going to pay him, he is the favorite to be that starter in Pittsburgh. And they also brought back Dwayne Haskins on an original round tender. He's going to be making $2.5 million or close to it in 2022. And we actually also could see them drafting a quarterback as well. So it's kind of all hands on deck, throwing a lot of, stuff at the wall to try to figure out who's going to replace Ben Roethlisberger. But it definitely seems like Mitchell Trubisky will be getting that first shot. I think that all of us kind of expected Mason Rudolph to be getting that first shot. So Steelers fans might not be too enthusiastic about Mitchell Trubisky, but he is at least more proven than Mason Rudolph at this point in their career. Ari, what did you make of Trubisky's deal with the Steelers?
Yeah, obviously we want to see the financials here. Where does it really come in? I think that'll tell us a lot about what they think about him. But we heard all along, really starting at the Combine, about all the Mitchell Trubisky buzz. I wasn't really sure if I should buy it or not. Where is it coming from? Because this guy was a free agent last year as well. Nobody really wanted him, and he went to Buffalo to learn there for a year and develop, be under Brian Daboll, be under that offense with John Dorsey and Josh Allen. And he believes that he was down there and he got to sit behind a great quarterback and just learn for a year. And again, this is a guy who was number 2 overall pick. There's a reason why he was picked there. He's still 27, 28 years old, still a young guy. And the reality is for Pittsburgh that obviously Ben is no longer there. Their fan base would have went crazy if it would have been Mason Rudolph. So you bring in a guy like Mitchell Trubisky. This is Kevin Colbert's final year. Like you said, I would not rule out them still drafting a quarterback in the first round. I think Kevin Colbert wants to leave that franchise with a quarterback there for the future. He wants to be the guy who picked the guy. So maybe it is Trubisky, but I would not rule out them potentially using that number 20 overall pick, maybe even trading up to find the quarterback, whether it is a Pickett or Malik Willis, someone who I know they really love. So, Trubisky's going to come in. Again, everyone talked about him in the 2017 draft as a quarterback with a lot of potential. We didn't get to see it in Chicago. There is differing opinions as to why that didn't happen, whether it was the coaching staff or whatever. But now he enters a team with Pittsburgh, a team that has a bunch of weapons on offense. He'll be with Matt Canada, who didn't have a great year last year with Ben, but that was Ben kind of also calling his shot sometimes. He's going to be coaching up Mitchell Trubisky. He's going to have another shot. And again, we'll see if that potential comes out of him. But he's entering a situation in a franchise that has been historically great. There's a coaching staff there that has been consistent for many years, and he'll have a shot to try to do it again there in Pittsburgh.
Seemed like Trubisky was also receiving interest from the New York Giants, possibly the Indianapolis Colts. Steelers had been rumored to be in on Jimmy Garoppolo, some other quarterbacks. I did find it interesting, Brad, that Deshaun Watson's still out there, Jimmy Garoppolo is still out there, Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston. Mitchell Trubisky is the next domino that falls after Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson, all of these guys. Were you surprised that Trubisky went off the board while some of these other quarterbacks are still available?
I think the narrative really stuck out that you saw Chicago's offense last year with Matt Nagy at head coach still struggle, whether it was Justin Fields or Andy Dalton or Nick Foles or whoever was out there. And I think teams convinced themselves that maybe Trubisky did not get a fair shake in Chicago. The draft note is pretty funny, though. I think, again, another touch of irony. Trubisky, when he was drafted in 2017, you mentioned they traded up, the Bears did, to go get him. They had just signed Mike Glennon to a 3-year, $54 million deal. In reality, it turned out to just be a 1-year deal for about $18.5 million. I wouldn't be surprised if that's basically the exact same type of contract structure that Trubisky ultimately does sign for in Pittsburgh, and maybe they do make that move up for a Malik Willis or a Kenny Pickett, and he's kind of stuck in a similar situation. So, everything in this league seems to be cyclical, but it's a fair question. There are other legitimate quarterbacks in this league that seemingly available, and he went off the board first.
Let's wrap this up real quick with Browns released Jarvis Landry. That was after they traded, as we mentioned before, for Amari Cooper. I think that Jarvis Landry will have a pretty hot market now that he is a free agent. I think that we expect the Bills to possibly be involved, Kansas City Chiefs, some other teams that value slot receivers. But Ari, with this wide receiver class that's getting paid massive amounts of money, were you surprised at all that the Browns eventually settled on releasing Jarvis Landry rather than trading him or restructuring their contract?
Well, it felt like this was the only option they really had. Obviously, word kind of came out, I believe it was about a week ago, that he could be a potential cut candidate, would have saved over 14 million cap space. And after they traded for Amari Cooper, they tried to explore a trade. He was seeking a trade. Nothing really came to fruition. They tried to figure out a new contract, kind of went nowhere. So they granted his release today, which is kind of nice of them, instead of waiting another 2 days when some of these other guys are going to be off the market. But as we mentioned earlier, I think the Christian Kirk deal from earlier today has kind of put a pause on some of these other guys, especially a guy like Allen Robinson, maybe a guy like DJ Chark, and then Jarvis Landry. We'll see what he ends up doing. Odell Beckham Jr. as well is out there. He has the same agent as Kirk for what it's worth. So we'll see what happens, but he's one of the best slot receivers in football. It feels like he's, based off all the reporting, it feels like he wants to go to a team that has an experienced elite level type of a quarterback. You guys mentioned Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen in Buffalo. I saw a report about Green Bay. Not sure how accurate that was, but that's another team with Aaron Rodgers. So looking to go to a team that has a quarterback, get him the ball, been there, done that. So definitely a player to keep an eye on. Where he ends up, it looks like the quarterback might matter more to him.
That release did process today on the wire, so yes, he is available immediately. Brad, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here. Jarvis Landry, 29 years old. What do you think the market is for a 29-year-old slot receiver like Jarvis Landry?
Yeah, like Ari's saying, we're in a new landscape now with some of these deals coming in. He's a bit different than Kirk, who's more of a speed option out of the slot. He's obviously your possession receiver, but a very reliable guy. Shout out to our guy Dave Solfaro, who sent me a stat. Since 2014, he's had at least 80 receptions in 5 seasons. It's him, Travis Kelce, and one other, I think Davante Adams. Like, that's the only other guy. So, look, is he a game breaker? Is he going to break off massive touchdown runs? Maybe not, but a very reliable player. I think the contender thing is legit. I mean, look, he was on a bad Miami Dolphins team, got franchise tagged there, got traded on the tag to Cleveland, signed a nice extension there. Obviously, he didn't play out the last year, but played most of that contract. Don't want to speak for someone and what their preferences are, but I could see him prioritizing contending over another payday.
All right. Well, we will be back here every night this week, breaking down everything that's going on in free agency. We mentioned it earlier. Lots of big names still out there, so keep it on PFF.com for all of your news and analysis. We've got a promo code going on right now that is free agency 30 for 30% off all PFF subscriptions. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow Ari on Twitter at My Sports Update. And like I said, we will be back here with you tomorrow, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time.